Welcome to BE Cafe. We have with us Ben Page, the global CEO at Ipsos. Ben Page has, to his credit, he's predicted the outcome of not one but 3 elections across Canada, the UK, and the US with his company Mori, which was subsequently acquired by Ipsos, I think in 2005.
Correct. Very good memory.
And then right now he's moved into the role of global CEO at Ipsos. Welcome, Ben, to BE Cafe.
Thank you.
So, Ben, they say that, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
Yeah.
How have you eased yourself into the role of the global CEO?
Well, I've been discovering a lot of new things. I'd run one of our major regions for 12 years, so I was used to dealing with our clients and our people. But I think I didn't perhaps appreciate, obviously, just the size of running 90 countries is a bit more than running one country, and also the need to deal as a public limited company with investors. And that's a big, from somebody who'd been an operational manager to the global role, those two things, just the sheer scale and complexity. You suddenly have things like the war in Ukraine. I'm dealing with some issues about polling in the Balkans today. Who knows what it will be tomorrow? And then, of course, dealing with investors and trying to communicate clearly in a framework about what the business is doing. So the demands on your time dramatically expand. I think the main thing is is still the same principle, though, which I've always employed in my time as a manager and a leader.
It's also the changing nature of the business, right? Research is not it is.
Yes, but I mean, I think that research has been on a continual journey. So it's a popular sort of meme that digitization, and particularly in marketing, is going to change everything tomorrow. To be honest, this has been a story for at least 20 or nearly 30 years. So yes, there are lots of new technologies. I think what I found, what's interesting is that we now do things that I couldn't even have imagined when I started work. And I've been unusually in the same company effectively for the last 35 years, starting as a trainee and now becoming the global CEO. And we still do and find value in, and our clients find value in, all the things that we did back in 1987 when I started. But we also do things like taking router data and live data off thousands and thousands of phones in real time, satellite photography, drones, things that I wouldn't have even dreamt of when I started work. So all of these things coexist. And I think it's about having the right sort of information to help clients make the right decisions. We have constant shiny new toy syndrome in marketing and in market research, this new thing that put all your money in TikTok. Oh no, put it on Snap or something else, when actually we need to sort of stick to basic principles and use the tools that are right for the particular challenge or problem that we're facing. So we are a very diverse business in many countries, working both for governments, for charities, and of course the biggest brands in the world. And our largest clients are actually American tech companies like Google, which is interesting for a research company. But there's always been disruption, and there always will be. I think there's a lot of people who want to sell a story of, digital transformation, et cetera, and which is true, but one shouldn't exaggerate, particularly in a country like India. You've got millions and millions, a large percentage of the population are not even literate, an even larger percentage are not online, and telling us that we're going to do it all on the internet. Well, you will in Delhi and Mumbai and a few places, but not everywhere.
But then, when you say that people are straying away from those basic principles, what are the basic principles?
Well, in my industry, it is about, if you're trying to understand what people think about something, you do, at the end of the day, need to know if you've got a representative sample. The basic things our industry is founded on is a representative sample. If you've just got what people are saying on Twitter, which is very interesting and can be very informative, and I love Twitter. I spend too much time on Twitter. Nevertheless, you have to always remember that on any one of these channels that you might be looking at, it may or may not be representative. Now, of course, in many situations, people will have all the data. You will have all the people who, the details of everybody who went to your website because you insisted on collecting it to let them use it. So you will have all that data, but you won't have all the data. So I think keeping that in mind, and I think a challenge is understanding representativity, because otherwise you can make some very, very wrong decisions. I can remember some Americans a few years ago, who shall remain nameless, who published a poll showing that Indians were more likely than any other country on earth to wear a suit and tie at work. And the Americans thought, oh, this must be true, so they published it. They probably hadn't been to India.
Yeah.
And of course, what they had done was an internet panel in Mumbai and Delhi of professionals who were the people who were taking part. They hadn't thought that there might be some other people in India, and so they published it. I mean, it was crazy. So you need to be very careful.
They say that everything that research agencies come up with saying this is a good enough sample is too small for India.
No, well, that's not true. And I think it might be for detailed analysis, but the amazing thing about Bayesian statistics is that if you interview 1,000 people, it could be 1,000 people in Mumbai, it could be 1,000 people in northern India, it could be 1,000 people in the whole of India, it could be 1,000 people in the whole of Asia, or it could be 1,000 human beings across the planet. Yeah. The margin of error, provided it's a representative sample, will be the same, plus or minus 3%, for each of those three samples. And the thing I find even more amazing, but believe me, you have to, I'm the CEO of Ipsos, if we were able to interview a perfect sample of 1,000 sentient beings across the entire universe, as long as it was representative of those beings, that 1,000 sample would be accurate to plus or minus 3%. And I get into massive arguments about this on the internet. You've done this poll of India or just in Britain of only 1,000 people. So you idiot, you fool, how can you do this? And I said, look, imagine a huge bowl of soup. And you want to taste this soup. As long as you've stirred it properly, you only need a very small sip to know if it's too salty. You don't have to drink the whole bowl of soup. So it's the same.
Such a lovely anecdote.
It's the same with sampling people in India. 1,000 Indians, as long as they're representative of India as a whole, will be accurate to plus or minus 3%. 95 times out of 100. If you want to compare Mumbai and Delhi, you might need, and I don't know, Kolkata and, Chennai or whatever, Goa, you might start needing a slightly bigger sample. But no, it's one of the immutable laws of statistics.
When we talk about representative sample size, particularly in the television measurement space in India, it's often debated that, the sample size isn't accurate, it doesn't kind of factor in my audience and so on. So it's always been kind of...
Yeah, but that's a common complaint, and you're trying to, if you're running one of these media studies, and we run these in many countries, the issue is that although, as we've just discussed, 1,000 people will give you an accuracy of plus or minus 3%, of course, when you say, well, I'm this channel watched by only 5% of the population, and I want to look at them in detail, a 1,000 sample only gives you 50 people there, and of course that will not be enough to analyse. So you can see why I want 10,000 people who watch, of the 1 million who watch my station, in this sample in order to look at it. So you can see it, but it's a trade-off. And I think on this, and it's interesting that you talk about media studies, because this is one where there's very many demanding consumers, the advertisers, the content and channel owners, the media owners. However, they don't like paying always for quality and for a tool that meets their needs. So they grudgingly pay, and then they'll say, oh, so it's not, well, you get what you pay for. Sadly, in this industry, like so many, you get what you pay for. So, yeah, if you want a larger sample, then commission a larger sample. Very simple. I mean, unfortunately, nobody's charity gives me money, so I've got to do what I'm paid to, what somebody is willing to pay for. If they're only willing to pay for a 10,000 sample or whatever it is, then that's what it's going to be.
Okay, but for argument's sake, the direct-to-home televisions, they actually can measure every home, right? It need not be a sample anymore.
Yes. No, that's true. You get a lot of data about that. So
are they eating into the business of
media measurement is not really, to be honest, because I think people still want an independent, authoritative measure. And if you're saying, well, here are my audience figures, and it's like when you take everybody's individual audience figures and you add them up, you suddenly find the population of India is now, larger than the population of the world or something. So you need to be a little bit careful. And generally, what you see despite the fact that media owners increasingly have a lot of data about their users, they still often want, and advertisers want, a sort of currency that they can trust, that has been independently produced, rather than just the owner of the media station saying, I have 10 trillion very rich people who watch me. Well,
your business stay relevant in the era of customer data platforms and so on?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. What's happened in our business, what's happening very crudely, is that if you're averagely clever, averagely fast, and averagely cheap, you may as well leave now. So what's happening is the industry is bifurcating. You've got very fast and cheap data, so we provide DIY solutions. You know, you can go on your phone now, launch a survey in 10 countries and get the answers before you leave this TV studio if you want to. That's one thing. So fast and cheap, and then much more high quality, much more added value. And so in the same way that Netflix starts off as a distributor and ends up as a content creator and a distributor, we have moved from just gathering data to building an advisory business. At the moment, I'm flying drones around the Ukraine. Why am I doing that? In order to work out the level of damage for the World Bank to model the reconstruction costs. So our business is incredibly diverse, and you obviously know about things like media measurement, quite a lot of it, but the diversity of our business is extraordinary, and that's actually part of Ipsos's deliberate strategy. We believe that we can run our 75 different services profitably and effectively. It's a different strategy to some of my global competitors. We believe that diversity and the fact that we do a lot of work for government. The pandemic saw us build large-scale random testing programs for COVID, and we were flying testing samples around to laboratories, which if you told me I was doing that in January or February 2020, I'd have said, get out of here. And we were doing that for 2 years.
Research has always been based on intent, right?
Sure.
Whereas companies are now saying that, hey, we have action from real-time data.
Well, of course, what people say and what they do are not always the same. And long before we had lots of digital data, we always knew, of course, that people said one thing and sometimes did something else. I think one of the interesting things is, why is Google one of my biggest clients? And what Google say about Ipsos is we partner with Ipsos to understand emotions in a way machines can't. So even a company like Google, which has a lot of data about behavior, needs some insight into the why. And that's what research, good quality research, is able to do. We've seen a boom in qualitative research, just talking to people, just filming people, actually, observational research over the last decade, even as they have more and more data. So it's about triangulation, and nobody has actually all the data.
Okay, speaking about behavioral data, the role of neuroscience in research. There have been a lot of kind of attempts, but nobody's been able to scale it up.
Well, I think that's not strictly true. So we do facial coding for advertising testing on a vast scale, and that's become almost standard, actually. So how are you reacting if we show you this ad? How does your face, do you show disgust, et cetera, et cetera. So that's become pretty standard. Wearables, there are, pulse, there's experiments in terms of trying to measure brain waves, et cetera. I mean, I think there was a lot of enthusiasm about these things. And of course, there's always somebody selling these things who want to say that, old Ben Page and Ipsos, they'll all be redundant because we'll be doing it all through brain scans or watching people. I mean, we do a lot of website evaluation with our user experience work, where you're using tools to look at where people look at on the screen first. But all of these tools, they're important, but none of them, in a sense, just sort of wipes out or replaces something else. It refines what we know. It adds sometimes an extra 10% to what we know. Implicit reaction times, not just how do you feel about Mr. Modi, but when we ask you to say how you feel about Mr. Modi, do you click, well, I love him to bits immediately, or I hate him? Or do you sit there thinking? And that, even though you might have a positive or a negative answer, knowing how long it took to give that positive or negative answer is also interesting in itself. So I think we're getting a fuller and fuller, we have more and more tools available to understand, but ultimately there's a lot of human judgment and people involved in using that data.
Amazing. And since you brought politics in, I can't help but ask you about how do you get it right every time? Well,
we're pretty good. We're not perfect. There's a man called Professor Will Jennings at the University of Southampton who has studied every general election in the world since 1940. He's an interesting guy. And what he's discovered is that on average, opinion polls, because I think there's a common meme that opinion polls are useless these days and they don't predict anything. And so on average, since 1940, the average error for each party in general elections worldwide is plus or minus 2. And it hasn't changed.
And that's better than usual market research,
Well, no, I
which
think
is plus or minus 3.
we just did on Sunday, we did the Italian election, and I think we were accurate to plus or minus 1%. In the British election in 2019, our average error for each party was 0.3%. But the margin of error that you're talking about with this data is plus or minus 3. So I think what happens is that when you have very close political events like Brexit or the Trump election of 2016, probably, the lesson we've learned from those elections is that when they're like 2% apart, we shouldn't say, basically there's noise in the data and you have to just say too close to call. But the media are always, well, Ben, yes, but he's 2 points ahead, so let's say 2 points ahead. Yeah, but friend, it's really too close. We need to be a bit more insistent about it being too close to call. But overall, achieving a representative sample, and the one thing that some of our misses in the last few years have taught us is really to stop trying to be clever and outguess the electorate. And what we found is that the best at the moment, the best thing to do is to build the most accurate sample that you can, back to representative samples, build the most accurate sample that you can, and then trust the data. Rather than saying, oh, well, as a trend, I can see support for this party is going down every day, so by the time we get to Thursday, just trust the data. But make sure that you've done everything you can to start with to make sure it's right.
So one trick is never try to kind of outguess the data, right?
Never try and outguess the electorate. I mean, the interesting thing with Brexit was that we were 2 points out, so we predicted a Remain win, and of course it was a Leave vote. But of course, on the morning of the election, of the Brexit vote, we had our raw data, which was 51% for Leave. But the problem was, me and my team, and we were all on the phone at 4 a.m. arguing. Yes, but the poll last week was 53%. This poll was taken on Tuesday. By the time we get to Friday morning or Thursday night, it will be over the wire. It will be 49. There's a clear trend. And remember what happened in the last referendum in Scotland about the Scottish referendum, when of course it went from 55 down to 45. So come on, guys, we can see it. So, and again, we should have just ignored this classic human problem of
bringing
bias,
the gut when
bringing in gut feel, this tendency to extrapolate from past data, where actually we had all these working class people who said that they never normally voted and were about to vote, and we're like, nah, they won't vote. We were stupid. They were, so we should have just, if we'd taken the raw data, we'd have been right. But we tried to outguess them. We never do it.
So in a real-time world, you're suggesting that you should trust real-time data?
Well, as long as it's a representative sample. I mean, otherwise it'll be wrong in real time if it's a biased sample. I mean, it's like trying to survey India using online polling. If you really say that you're going to understand everybody in India using online, you can have online polls every second. They're still going to be wrong. You'll be excluding a vast parts of southern rural India who will not be represented in the data at all. So it will not tell you what India thinks. It will tell you about what certain more affluent people, more educated people think.
Yeah, but okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but they say that online gives you speed.
It does give you speed.
But if you had to put a foot on the street, it would maybe take you much longer.
Of course. No, it's true. But one of the things that, but if the problem is you can collect the data fast or slow, but if you're missing a large part of the population, you can't represent people who are completely unpresent. Illiterate peasants are not in the data. They're not in the data. However fast you get the data. What we are doing, which we're doing in Europe, we've already done in the UK and America, is build samples called the knowledge panel. And there what we do, back to this point on speed, is randomly choose homes around a country. If they are online, fine. If they're not online, we install the internet. We've done this in both Britain and America. We install the internet, we give them a tablet, and then we can do real-time polling, including people who normally are not online at all. And that's been extremely successful. We're currently rolling it out across Europe, all the 27 European countries, and maybe it will come to India one day.
But does that make research expensive then?
It does cost more, but as I say, you get what you pay for. So you can have cheap and fast, you can have cheap, fast and good. But you can't necessarily have all three at the same time. You generally have cheap and fast, or you can have fast and good, but it's not cheap. You have to choose.
Okay, the reporting mechanisms, coming to that, they have not managed to kind of keep pace with the rest of the world.
Well, I think
right?
we've got portals. Increasingly, we've got portals, and the cutting edge, such as it is data being collected live, streamed straight into the cloud. The client then taking it back out of the cloud into Python, into Tableau, or dropping it into PowerPoint. That is reality in some countries. So that's pretty much real time, and there's the chart moving around in front of you. What I would say, though, this obsession with speed, there are some things that you need. If you're testing a website and you need to know, do I make the picture bigger or smaller? For some clients, we write a report every 6 hours, 24/7, because they've got a major portal. It's millions and millions of dollars are at risk here. They're trying to optimize it. So we're literally delivering data and reports. But for many things, you're dealing with a business problem. Where do I build this new, office, shop, factory? How do I change this car? Do you really need the data in 5 minutes, or would it be better to wait a few days, or even a week if you're going to get better data? So I think we need to have a sort of sense of proportion, and exactly why do you need that? We found, interestingly, that the DIY solutions we offer people, where they can literally launch a survey and have the data in a few hours, they're actually saying, could you help? They don't actually want it. They'd rather you help them with it, because when they get it, they still, what do I do with it now?
Yeah, maybe they don't know to ask the right questions right?
Well, that's right. So we're finding that our DIY solutions are popular because, of course, they're cheap, and we've tried to bake into it a lot of quality measures. But interestingly, people still want someone else, an expert, to work with them. And I think that is gradually changing, and we will see large companies wanting to do DIY themselves. But it's amazing how many people still want to speak to a wise guy like your good self, or maybe even me, to find out, is this normal? What else would you suggest? And so our business is about people and technology. It's not just about the technology on its own.
Okay, and coming to the use of artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, how far are we in that journey?
Well, I mean, I think we're only beginning. I mean, machine learning is obviously huge. I mean, and we're using it to take on board, to analyze pictures, live video, to analyze thousands or millions of posts, etc., and to distill information from them. I think what we have at the moment, though, is really dumb AI. So it's just machine, even something like some of the models that have worked on, they've read every single newspaper article ever. And so you ask it to write a speech about Donald Trump talking about nature, and it just does it. You then ask it, how many fish are riding bicycles today? And it says, it says 24 or something, because it's not it doesn't actually think.
Yeah.
It's brilliant copying.
Yes.
And that brute power is still amazing, and we can use that. I think the game changer, and it's not clear if or when this becomes available, is this general AI that is able literally it's read every book and it remembers them. It literally does know everything. And then when it sees things, it immediately links to some other databases, makes connections, and starts making suggestions. At this point, my job will be changing. But I think we're a long way away, and there's a huge way to go in trying to use machine learning for knowledge workers. I mean, I was with 300 young Indians in their 20s who are in one of our new business that we've opened this year, to make their lives faster and to give a 25-year-old what a 55-year-old knows about something. So all those things that I've learned through decades of experience, I can now build that into an algorithm. So it now says, hang on, there's something here you really need to look at. It's not statistically significant, but it's unusual in this context. And so but even there, we're only in the foothills. So I think, any predictions about the future are tricky. We were meant to be living on the moon by now. Back in the 1970s, we were supposed to be living on the moon and Mars by now. That hasn't quite worked out. So I think on general AI, I'm not completely convinced about exactly when it will arrive. But when it does, it will be astonishing.
Early on, you mentioned about Google being one of your biggest clients.
Yes.
So the way I was visualizing this was, will there be a Google Meter tomorrow powered by Ipsos, which tells you about fair coverage, bias coverage, and so on?
Well, there are. They could do. I think the thing about Google is they're a brilliant company driven by advertising. They could go into research and make me bankrupt tomorrow. I'm like the small fish that cleans their teeth. I'm quite helpful to them. They're the big shark, and I'm the small fish. But we have a very strong relationship with them because, as they say, we help them understand emotion in a way that the machines, even the best machines today, can't. But yes, we might do something with them. I mean, I think there's a project that I'm doing at the moment for the UK government, for one of their agencies, which looks at fake news. And so you look at what people say they consume, you look at what they actually consume, and then you look at their attitudes. And so you can see, are people who are exposed to stories about vaccines being fake, or I don't know, the Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum or something like that. Is that, are they, can we see that were they before we poll them at the beginning and at the end to see if their views have shifted and how much they might have been influenced by that? Because sometimes, people who are racist, for example, in Britain, there are a few, they all seem to read sort of right-wing newspapers raging about immigration. Is it the right-wing in newspaper raging about immigration that's made them racist, or are the people who are racist just like newspapers that are? So which way does it work? And those are the sorts of things that we can try and understand. I think research can help give a lot of data and clues to many of these things.
Are we saying that marketers are actually missing the wood for the trees?
Sometimes I think, yes, this obsession with the idea that, only people in their 20s make different choices about toothpaste and you can ignore everybody else. I think that's a bit presumptuous, and we should be a bit more thoughtful. And if you can get it right, I think you're neglecting a big market. There's a lot of stereotypes that are deployed, and it's the same with women and old people, for example. We did a piece of work looking at who feels ignored in advertising. And interestingly, it wasn't young people or black people. It was actually, it wasn't even gay people. It was actually old people. So they feel the advertising doesn't reflect them or who they are. So old people are either shown as sort of doddery and rather lovely. But actually, we need to, British world society is aging. It's one of the very clear trends. Even India, which of course is a booming population, will eventually follow China. China is now shrinking.
Yeah.
India is on the same path. It's still accelerating. The only region of the world that's going to be in actual population growth in 20 or 30 years' time will be Africa. Everywhere else will be shrinking. And that may not be a bad thing in terms of our use of resources as a species.
Also, ageism is the new racism.
To a certain extent, yes. And the interesting thing about ageism, I think it's important, and particularly actually in a young society like India, although you do have this very strong familial responsibility thing going on, which is very different in say, the West. But if you think that you can't do something, say, when you're 60, on average, so people who think that they're old and that therefore they can't do things, or that old age is going to be miserable, on average they die 7.5 years earlier than people who are positive. And they actually think, when we do cognitive tests, they think slower, because I can't do the crossword anymore, I'm old now, and they move more slowly. So there's a lot about, so stereotypes can actually kill effectively. Yeah.
Professor Scott Galloway said that attention is the new oil.
Yes.
And
there's a lot of truth in that.
And you're sitting right in the middle of that attention economy.
Yeah.
How do you see
Well, one of the things is to measure it, of course, and so you being able to see how long somebody dwelt on something actually in real time, and rather than asking them to remember, is hugely impactful. And of course, yes, the whole our whole ecosystem, the digital ecosystem we spend a lot of time in, is all, of course, about just getting your eyeballs. All those social media owners who are blamed for spreading hate or misinformation, they're not, they don't care about hate and misinformation. They just want your attention. And if feeding you hate stuff makes you watch it more, or feeding you stuff in some cases that makes you want to commit suicide, makes you watch more, then the algorithm will give you more of the same stuff. It's funny, when I talk to people like Twitter, they say actually they've tried changing the algorithm to give you things that might surprise you, and of course people don't like it. So yes, it is. That's the currency. And if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? So it is about attention. And I think research is helpful in understanding what will capture attention. But people do only have 24 hours. It's attention, but to get that attention, it's also about creativity and engagement. And so we think that we'll be publishing on this next year. The key is, it is attention, but if you want attention, you need to think about expectations. So what are they expecting from this particular moment and this particular brand? The context, because when I'm wandering around the supermarket aimlessly, it's slightly different than when I'm, reading a book. And of course, empathy. Can you demonstrate empathy? And if that in a world that we're in, those three things, expectation, context, and empathy, matter above all. And then you'll get the attention.
Brilliant. On that note, that's Ben
My
Page
pleasure.
for you. What a lovely discussion it's been.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having been our guest on Bee Cafe.
No, my pleasure.